Hello friends and welcome to today's session on vREST. In this session we will discuss how you may validate the database state after performing an operation via REST API. I will be following the tutorial on DB validation which is written in our extensive documentation. Any scripts which I will use during the session, you may pick them from our documentation. For demonstration, we will take a sample API that creates a record in the database, and after execution of that API, we are going to validate the database state which we created through the API. So let us quickly set up the project and a test case to create the record on the server. So let's see how we may set up the project. For that, just click on this add vREST project over here and create a new folder, say database demo, and click on this project. Now let's create a sample test case. As this request consumes post, so we will select post method over here and let's provide the API endpoint over here, and you may provide a meaningful summary, and finally click on this confirm button to create the test case. Now let's provide the request body as well and save the request body. Now if you run this test case, as you can see that our test case is working fine. We may even generate the expected body and ignore the dynamic part in the API response. So far we have validated the response content. So in this way you may create a test case which is working absolutely fine. Now we will see how you may validate the database state as well. Uh, this particular test case is going to create a record in the database, and now we will see how we may validate that particular database record by connecting to the database directly in within the vREST application. To validate the database state, we will take the step-by-step approach. So the first step is setting up the desired npm dependency for your database. As vREST uses Node.js modules to extend it further. So if you are new to the Node.js or npm, then don't worry. You need not to be an expert in Node.js, and this is going to be one-time activity. And if you still need any help, then feel free to reach out to us with your queries or issues. So first we will need to find out the npm module for our database which we are going to validate. You may search for desired dependency for your respective database vendor in the website npmjs.com, and you may search your package over here. Say I would like to search for MongoDB, then you may search for MongoDB over here and click on search button. We recommend you to use any official library for your database. Now let's specify this dependency in our vREST project. For specifying the dependency in your project, suppose this is our vREST project, and in this project first set up a package.json file if you don't have any, and let's pick the content of this package.json file from our documentation. So this is our documentation, and let's pick up this package.json file from this documentation and paste it over here. As you can see that in this package.json file only the important part is this particular dependency we have specified. So if your vREST project is already having this package.json file, then add the desired npm dependencies. As we have never set up this package.json file earlier, so we have created this package.json file, and in this way you may configure the dependency. So let's save it, and now let's install the dependencies. Just move to the terminal or command prompt if you are using Windows machine, then move on to the vREST project directory and run the command npm install to install the dependencies for your vREST project, and press enter. It will install the desired dependencies for your vREST project. If you are collaborating on this project with other team members, then other team members will just need to run this command on their own machines to set up the dependencies. That's it. As our MongoDB driver dependency is configured and installed, now let's move on to our next step. So our next step is setting up the database connection. So to establish the database connection, we will need to write a utility method inside vREST application. For this, just move to vREST application and then click on this configuration option over here, and then click on utility methods. So here we are going to create a utility method to set up the database connection. Now click on new method over here. You may name it like get MongoDB connection. And for the function body, you may copy the script from our tutorial. So let's replace this function body with the copied one and save it. Here in this utility method, we are requiring the npm dependency which we have just specified in our previous step in the package.json file, and we are setting up the database connection as per the module documentation. Few things to note here. Number one, any information which can be dynamic can be accessed through these dot variables. For example, here in this method, we are accessing the database name through db underscore name and connection URL using the vars.connection URL. These variables we will configure in our next step. Finally, this function is returning a promise. vREST supports asynchronous operations with the help of promises. So here we are just connecting to the MongoDB database and resolving the database connection on successful connection, and otherwise we are rejecting it with the error. These console.log statements are useful in debugging any utility method. These statements will be printed on the console tab of the developer tool. So our next step is setting up the desired variables. To set up the variables, you can move to the variable section over here and you can configure the various variables like db underscore name and connection URL. Suppose our database name is contactdb. You may specify whatever is your database name over here, and let's specify the connection URL as well. So for me, this is the connection URL for my MongoDB instance. You may specify it as per your own configuration. And let us specify a variable for fetching the database connection. So let's name it like mongo underscore con for connection, mongo connection, and here we will invoke the utility method which we have specified in our previous step. So our utility method name was get mongodb connection, and we are invoking this method over here, and it will return the mongodb connection to a variable mongocon. So in this way you can configure the variables. You may override these variables in specific environments if you want to use different databases for production and staging. So our next step is to configure the script to fetch the records from the database. For this we will write another utility method. Let's move on to our application again and then click on the utility method and then click on the new method. So let's name our method like find record by id and save it. Now let's copy and paste the script from our documentation. So here is the script. Let's copy and paste it over here and click on save button again. We are going to call this utility method via variable extractor tab. So these two special variables will be prefixed, but we are not going to use the first two arguments, and we are only using the last two arguments, which is the collection name and database record id. So here in this method we are using the mongo connection variable which we have configured in our previous step, and through that connection we are obtaining the mongodb collection by passing the collection name, and finally we are invoking the find one method on that particular collection to return the desired database record. We are passing the database id as an argument to this find one method. Here again we are using the promises to perform the asynchronous operation as we have done earlier in our previous utility method. So this is how we can write the methods in vREST application. You may customize it as per your own needs. So far we have configured everything for our database validation, and now let us see how we can execute the query and verify the results after the test case execution. As this sample API creates a record in the database, let's try to fetch the record from the database and validate it. For this, just move on to the variables tab. Here first we need to extract the contact ID we have just created. So let's try to execute this test case again, and in the execution tab, as you can see that the and ID information is in our actual response. So we will try to extract this information from the response. So for that we will add a variable, say contact ID, and here we will provide the JSON path. For this JSON path will be underscore ID. So it will extract the underscore ID field from the API response. Now let us try to fetch the database result as well for this particular record. So let's name it db underscore result, and in the next column you may invoke the utility method which we have just created in our previous tab. So our utility method name was find record by ID, and you will need to provide the arguments which are required for our method. So we will need to provide the collection name. For my database the collection name is contacts, and we will also need to provide the contact ID. So the contact ID is the variable which we just created above, and save it. We just need to provide the last two arguments. We don't need to provide the first two arguments, which will be sent automatically by vREST application. Note that the order of variables is important, otherwise if you don't extract the contact ID, then this particular contact ID variable will not be resolved. So our utility method will read the record from the database and return the results, and vREST runner will assign the results to the variable dbResult. This dbResult variable contains the whole database record. To define the assertions on this dbResult, let's move to the validation tab and click on add button to add a new assertion, and in the source column specify the custom source. For database validation we will use this custom source as a source, and in the property column we may specify any variable. So for our purposes let's specify db underscore result, which is our variable, and let's try to validate a field in that particular record. Say we are going to validate the name field, and let's specify it in the expected value as vREST. Similarly, we may add other assertions as well for other fields in the record. So in this way you may validate the database state in vREST application. Try out this feature and drop your comments if you find this feature helpful. That's it for this session. Thank you for watching this video. I hope this session has provided meaningful information to you. If you find this video helpful, then please like this video and subscribe to our channel. And feel free to comment on this video to provide your suggestions and your valuable feedback.